Greetings, friends. I'm going to respond to an article called Technology Saves the World. It came out in 2021, I guess around June, so it's a little old, but not so old. It came out at a time when the pandemic had already been prolonged for some time, and we were able to look at developments. And Mark Andreessen writes this article for website Future A16Z. I don't know, it's like a tech trends or capital, venture capital, tech trends, this sort of commentary website. And he co-created the highly influential Mosaic internet browser, and he co-founded Netscape. So he has a background in the internet. And I thought I would respond to his outrageous article. And he says, of course, technology saves or save the world. My stance is that technology won't save the world. This world will not be saved. So he says in the beginning, we are coming out of COVID years early, with many livelihoods and businesses preserved compared to what we had any right to expect. And overwhelming credit goes to our spectacular technology industry. So he's already buying into the mainstream narrative about the virus, that it really was that bad. Is that what we saw? Is that what you'd expect a common sense person to come to the conclusion after seeing this? He goes on, the most amazing COVID technology has to be the vaccines. And I guess maybe I need to be a little careful about what I say here, but maybe I can take the risk. He talks about Moderna, a product of the American venture capital city, creating the mRNA vaccine within a few days of getting the genetic code for the virus. He calls this a tremendous advance. He says that we now have the technological tools to quite literally code nature, and the payoff to human flourishing will be profound. So my response to this is, of course, and I have to be careful what I say, but how do we actually know how well this type of therapy, as you might call it, how well does it actually work? Do we really know that so early on? He's using what I think is known as the "we now know" fallacy that people like Jay Dyer and Deacon Ananias have pointed out. We now know is, in other words, equal to what I'm saying has become popular, and the establishment has embraced this idea. We now know that the Earth is so and so billion years old. We now know that dark matter, blah, blah, blah. We now know that black holes, this and that. We now know that this species evolved from that species. All this mainstream establishment narrative, we now know. It's a logical fallacy. So he seems to think that we can be our own creators of nature. We've seen this idea before. It doesn't turn out well. It's based in pride. This will create human flourishing. Does he think that we're going to escape disease or death? Does he think we're going to create new species of humans? He shows the total delusion and the total arrogance of people in the technology class or the managerial class. He goes on, but technology applied to health during COVID didn't stop there. The US federal government authorized Medicare to cover the cost of telemedicine, so millions of Americans who could no longer see a doctor in person continued to receive care. Telemedicine has been viable for 2 decades, but the pandemic provided the final push for insurance reimbursement and therefore mass adoption, which he expects to continue. In the decades ahead, state-of-the-art healthcare will be available regardless of geographic location. And we will look back to this crisis as the turning point. So my response would be that it may be a good thing indeed that people who have no other means of seeing a doctor can get a virtual consultation. But seeing a doctor in person is still the best thing to do. Let's not gloss that over. Where is the human element in the thinking of this author, Mark Andreessen, co-founder of Netscape? When it comes to your health, besides the fact that a doctor can examine you in person far better than he could do so through a webcam, it's also the case that meeting a doctor in person is just far more human. I don't think it's necessary for me to elaborate on that when I say that it's just far more human. I think that's fairly obvious. And the thing is, I think it could be more normal to have these telemedicine appointments in places where we can already access real doctors. Partly it's because the system is already pushing it on us as a way of cutting costs and increasing efficiency. And partly people are going to adopt it because it's convenient. But will this really be a good thing for people's health? Will it really be a good thing for people's mental health? He was talking about mental health. I skipped over that part. I mean, mental health. Now it's going to be an online meeting with your therapist. So I find it doubtful that these will be good developments. It's very mentally disconcerting to explain one's medical problems to someone hundreds or thousands of miles away who you have never met, in person at least, and who may be a different race than you or a different gender than yourself. They may not even speak English as their first language. But they're dealing with you on, or trying to deal with you on an intimate and very important level. But none of this matters when it comes to efficiency, as they see the term efficiency. It's about the bottom line, about the money or the power or the control or the convenience or whatever it is. It's not about the human element. And more generally speaking, and again, maybe I'm not allowed to say this on YouTube, but here goes. It's just a lie when they say COVID made us do such and such a thing. When the truth is that they did it because they wanted to do it and it wasn't about the real risk. So saying COVID made us do this is masking the fact that the elites planned these measures all along. And if you don't think that's the case, at least consider a few obvious happenings. For one, there was a period of time in which cash was not accepted at many stores, and in this article he goes on to say that it was great that stores and restaurants used contactless payments, as if this is a great convenience. It's like, wow, it's actually eliminating cash, which is your one remaining means of conducting business without any electronic chip tracing your location and the transaction that you made with your name at a particular date and time and place, keeping a record where the corporations can now view that and potentially close your account or prevent you or at least surveil you based on whether you do things that they don't approve of. Not accepting cash also was to make you feel that you have to pay by an electronic chip. And another thing that happened during this time was that a huge number of small businesses went bankrupt, and they gave their market share to the big corporations which suspiciously were allowed to operate with fewer limitations and restrictions than the small businesses were. And a lot of the real estate of these defunct businesses was eaten up by big corporations. So condo construction in Toronto continued, as I personally witnessed. So he goes on, quote, by far the scariest non-health implication of COVID was the simultaneous powering down of much of the supply or producer and demand or consumer sides of the economy at the start of lockdown. The prospect of a second Great Depression was very real, as reflected in the stock market collapse of early 2020. But then a miracle happened, a technological miracle. Much of the economy kept operating. And in fact, many parts of the economy started operating even better under lockdown than before. The primary credit for this goes to the American worker, but almost as much credit is due to the technology that made this miracle possible. Now he's right. It did seem like there was going to be a depression, and then that didn't quite happen. So he is accurately pointing that out. But he's neglecting the fact that it was just other parts of the economy getting destroyed. So there's really a creative destruction going on here, which some people describe capitalism that way, as creative destruction. He goes on, the most positively shocking development was that virtually all knowledge work in the economy simply kept going. Of course, companies were forced to shut down physical production facilities such as car factories, and frontline workers bore the brunt of in-person exposure to COVID. I mean, give me a break there. But he's right about the factories closing down. But consider this, he says, not a single significant company engaged in service provision, whether banking, insurance, communications, media, healthcare, you name it, had any downtime at all. Every knowledge worker went home, fired up their laptops, jumped on Slack and Zoom and Gmail and GitHub, and kept on going. He says he must have talked to 100 CEOs through this initial period. Tells you a lot about where this guy is in society. He's not a common person like you or I, okay? He's talking to 100 CEOs. And these CEOs were uniformly shocked at how well remote work, this is it, a tongue twister, how well remote work worked right from the start. Well, of course they would be pleased because it's increasing their bottom line. It's more expensive to have people in an office. So my response to this, funny for him that service provision in his conception does not include barbers or restaurants or gyms. I guess he did say knowledge work. But still, when we think of services generally, we would think of things like that. But for him, it's about the banking, insurance, communications, media, healthcare. In other words, the corporate institutions that rule the world, the scum of the earth. Now, I wouldn't describe everyone in healthcare as scum of the earth, but their reputation has been hugely tarnished over the last 2 years. In general, like especially banking, especially media or insurance, these are corporate institutions which suck and have sucked a lot of blood. They've sucked all this blood during the pandemic, and he thinks it's a wonderful thing for the economy. I guess they have grown in their way. It's just this weird transformation going on. And it's also interesting his use of the term knowledge worker, because you're working independently at home. You use more knowledge than someone working at an office or at a factory or a farm. I don't get it, really. There's a certain thing going on where you've read or you've studied something, mathematics or engineering or how to use some software. In a way, that's a different kind of knowledge, but I don't fully see what he's getting at there with that term. And I'd say that there's obviously nothing wrong with working from home, but I don't like how it's being celebrated in this article and in generally, because this is not the natural state of affairs for humans to work from home. I guess in a way in the traditional society, the man would work close to home and the women would be producing things at home. But that's not like what we mean by earning an income. There have always been authors, intellectuals, and creative types, entrepreneurs, and free agents, or nowadays writers of computer code, or those who use software design programs. But now, in the last few years, we're really witnessing something different to get a large portion of society to subsist in this unnatural manner of being isolated at home, or relatively isolated. This is not exactly the entrepreneurial spirit. You might call it the free agent spirit to a degree. Yeah, you could call it that. But it's not quite the same. It's a situation where most of these people are employees with a corporate boss, but they're just more physically disconnected from the people who employ them, and let alone their co-workers. So in the next paragraph, I don't need to read, but he goes on to celebrate how online marketing and online payments have exploded. And this is a good thing, he says. But how do these industries produce anything real? Just like banking, insurance, or media, they merely manipulate reality, and they cannot create anything real because they're corrupt. The author of this article is celebrating a phantasm economy. And in the next paragraph, he celebrates how online education blew up. And again, this can be fine. Online tutoring, help you learn a language, help you with your math problems. That's great, but it's less than preferable. It's how we cope with the modern world. Don't try to dress it up. So he goes on mentioning Netflix, Hulu, and Disney, and that we should not ignore the role that online and streaming and entertainment played during the pandemic. Being cooped up at home is not enjoyable for anyone, but there's no question it's better when you have a near infinite range of movies, shows, music, and games at your fingertips thanks to the internet. Roblox, for example, occupied millions of kids while their parents were working remotely with both gaming and coding. And millions of adults used the internet during the pandemic to learn chess, cooking, gardening, etc. Life under lockdown shouldn't have been pure drudgery, and our technology-powered media companies rose to the occasion. They rose like during a war effort, they rose to keep the masses stimulated. What a pathetic and bleak view of life this is. I mean, being alone with yourself is drudgery, he would take it. So therefore, you should have some stimulation in the form of entertainment from huge corporations which push a left-wing and degenerate agenda. And this includes Disney, which is now interested in perverting your children, or Netflix, where white men are portrayed as evil or as buffoons and every couple is interracial. And I think that's a really messed up example he gives of the kids occupied with this online entertainment while their parents, I mean, I guess it's good that the parents are near their children and not having their kids being perverted by the public school system or the daycare system. I guess that's good, but it's messed up that you've got this family together under one roof, but they're all like plugged into this system and therefore probably somewhat disconnected. Like, yeah, Johnny, just plug into your virtual thing there with the Roblox. I'm coding, and then the wife is on the phone doing whatever. And I mean, again, I'm exaggerating here. Maybe this is it's a really messed up image. So he goes on. And this is really rich. He says, the internet also provided human connection. Our social media platforms delivered under considerable strain. Like, it's as if this is a war effort and Facebook delivered. I mean, I guess there is a propaganda war, so in a sense, he's not wrong. So the social media companies delivered under strain, keeping isolated people connected online, even when they couldn't be with one another in person. This mattered for people with mental health problems. Again, one has to imagine the counterfactual of a world of only letters, meaning written letters, like you put it in the mail, or a world of expensive phone calls, to understand how much our modern technology improved our quality of life through this period. And then this is really rich here. He says, many churches, synagogues, and mosques also went online, along with weddings, baptisms, and funerals, and continued to serve their communities in ways that would have been impossible even a decade ago. Are you kidding me? They continued to serve their communities by going online. And serve them in ways that would have been impossible a decade. Yeah, I guess if you mean having online whatever, live stream. Now, the internet doesn't provide real human connection. I mean, in some very weak manner it does, but it's no different than talking to someone on a phone. You have a phone and you can maybe see someone's image moving. It's like, okay, it's like a fancy phone call. And phone calls are nice. But that's not the same thing as a real human encounter. It's not real human connection. This is how people, at least in speaking of how society adapted or changed in these ways of live streaming more of these things. This is actually how people pretend that everything is okay. That you didn't kill the family. Oh, you didn't kill Christmas and you didn't kill Thanksgiving. Why? Because you get to talk with people electronically. This is worse than a cope. This is a lie. This is a counterfeit of the real thing. And as for talking of weddings, baptisms, and funerals, or church services generally, only a person of great spiritual sickness could say that these gatherings can be canceled effectively because of technology, that technology can somehow transmute or transform our real human life into something else, something digital, something in the ether. And funny that he disdains the old times of writing letters and paying money for phone calls, because people in those days were probably more interested in human connection, and they were deeper people with more meaning in their lives. And they probably had better social skills. They could probably listen and have better conversations. Our culture now is so illiterate that letter writing is foreign to us. He's celebrating that we've become dumb and we can be easily stimulated by centrally directed corporate propaganda which propagates to each bugman in his pod across a vast distance. And in the conclusion to his article, Andresen says, that the biggest achievement of technology, or more specifically, he means the internet, the biggest achievement during the pandemic being, quote, to permanently divorce physical location from economic opportunity, which gives us a real shot at radically expanding the number of good jobs in the world, while also dramatically improving quality of life for millions or billions of people. Yeah, real quality of life after what we've read so far. But this is still fantasy. Realistically, he's shooting for the stars because what he calls knowledge workers contribute to the economy undoubtedly, but they are not producing anything real. Like banking is not producing anything real. Insurance is not producing anything real. Neither is communications or media. And you could make an argument that engineers doing designs and stuff is more tangible, but there's a certain section, there's a certain niche that exists for people like this in society, and you can't move too many people into this component of the economy. It only fits a certain number of people, and I'd say a minority. This is the same kind of thinking that they're going to automate the working class out of existence, and they want to do that, like self-driving trucks, they're coming. So do you think this is going to turn out well for civilization? Hasta luego, amigos.